interest of saving
It has
time,
20
not
minutes,
fully cover
and
their
then
bio
once
in
it starts,
each
because yeah,
section.
you have to start here
Paraphrase
at the
everything,
red.
summarize
Okay,
basically,
that works.
because their presentation is amazing, and it's based on the recent data that they took from a lot of companies in Canada who are basically working on vehicle routing. So the first speaker is Ya Gao. She's a postdoc fellow at the Department of Civil and Mineral Engineering at U of T. Her research involved travel domain modeling with the introduction of new mobility technologies and the interaction between urban development and transportation. Next we have João. João is a PhD student under Professor Hatsopoulou in transportation engineering. His research focuses on how urban policies and emerging mobility technologies influence human travel behavior, air quality, and vehicle emissions. And last but not least, we have Shuoyan. Shuoyan is a PhD student under Professor Miller. And in his PhD, he focuses on multimodal choice modeling, ride-hailing systems, and mobility as a service. And with that, I'd like to give the floor to awesome three people. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. We are glad to be here talking about vehicle for hire. In the email that we sent, we mentioned quite a lot about vehicle for hire, but in this case, in particular, vehicle for hire in Toronto, we mean taxis, we mean PTCs, Uber and Lyft, and also limousines. And this presentation in particular, we're going to be focusing a lot on PTCs, Uber and Lyft. So just the content we're going to cover in this presentation, we're going to talk about the overall impact of PTCs, current policies and changes, particularly in the city of Toronto, where we have been doing a lot of studies here. We're going to talk about supply, demand, emissions, total cost of ownership for different vehicle types, and vehicle for hire integration to the GTA model. So just as a context on how the sector is growing, when we talk about PTCs, just Uber, last year we had around 10,000 cities, almost 10 billion trips. In China, Didi had around 10 million trips last year too. We are talking about 7 million drivers, and on Lyft, which is basically in US and Canada, we are having around 40 million users, almost 1 billion rides too. So the sector is growing quite a lot, perhaps one of the biggest innovations in the transportation sector in the last decade. And of course, we have a lot of positive and negative impacts associated with it. So increasing accessibility, there's a lot of studies linking increase of accessibility in the last mile due to ride-hailing. Also increasing mobility, a lot of studies showing that people sometimes wouldn't have taken a trip at all if it was not for the Uber and Lyft availability. Studies associated with decreasing parking demand, traffic safety too, but at the same time, especially if we don't manage very well the demand and supply, we're going to have negative impacts in the transit ridership, even though there are some studies associating the complementary role of ride-hailing. There's also a lot of studies linking with drop in transit ridership, increase in congestions. Only in the city of Toronto, in downtown core, it's estimated that around 14% of total VKT in downtown is from ride-hailing vehicles. Emissions associated with it, and deadheading, which is basically when the driver is driving without passenger. They are either cruising or driving to pick up a passenger. And we have a lot of discussions around labor and worker issues, especially minimum wage, whether or not the driver is an employee of a PTC company. And there's also equity challenges, especially due to the cost of ride-hailing trips in the city. So we are just gonna jump in the specific case of city of Toronto, where we believe we have a interesting insights we are gaining through the availability of data. We are having this bylaw where PTC's company, they have to report their entire shift of the drivers, the origin and destination of every trip, and the period where the drivers they are cruising and available to accept the trip, but not actually picking up and transporting any passenger. And there's a lot of analysis going on, and we are not gonna cover everything, but just to mention, there's studies being conducted by the city of Toronto itself. There's surveys for vehicle for hire users being conducted too. There's partnerships with mobility network, especially UT-ITE and Shuoyan, who have been working with demand and supply. There's studies going on too, particularly with folks from the geography department around drivers' earnings too. And because we have this bylaw, we have an interesting data set where we can play around with different analysis. So only the PTC from 2020 to 2023 records, we are talking about around 171 million trips, around 14 million trips which was canceled too, but we still have the records. We have cruising stage where the drivers are just cruising around the city and waiting for an incoming trip, around 150 million data. We have around the total licenses around 180,000. Also, when it comes to TTS data, we do have around 5% of the households in the area using PTC, and we have been seeing this ridership increasing. And we are also able to draw a basic profile of PTC users based on the TTS data. So just a brief introduction of how we have been seeing the sector growing in Toronto. We're gonna have a couple more slides from Shuoyan about it too, but only from 2016 to March 2019, it grew from 60 to 107,000 trips. And as we can see here, we have the first wave of COVID pandemic. The second wave, we had the Omicron event, but it's one of the cases where we reached the pre-pandemic levels very fast. And even if we look at two other cities, if we look at transit ridership, for instance, we don't see those rapid recovery in any other transport mode too fast. And of course, this is the overall trends for the city, but it's growing differently depending on the area. And we can see here, especially in the suburbs, it's been growing much more than the pre-pandemic levels. One of the reasons is because the number in the past was a bit smaller, any increase might also have a higher increase in percentage too, while downtown Toronto is still a little bit below the pre-pandemic levels. We are talking about 25,000 PTC vehicles a day. It's distributed, of course, along different hours of the day, but it's quite a lot of vehicles. And I'm going to jump into the overall trends in emissions based on these characteristics of trips. Just a convention here, we're going to talk a lot about P1, P2, P3, what is it? So usually when the driver is available in platform until they accept the trip, they are basically cruising, waiting for an incoming trip. This P2 is when the driver accepts the trip and they are going to pick up a passenger. And so in the P1 and P2, as is what we call deadheading, is when the driver is without passenger, and the P3 is when there's a pickup of passenger and drop off. And we can see that based on the total emissions, around 60% is emissions coming from the P3 stages, where there's passengers in the vehicle, and around 40% is emissions due to deadheading. So we can also see that from 2022, we haven't had any major decrease or slightly change in deadheading levels since that time. And this is one of the challenges all PTC across different cities has in terms of managing a acceptable level of deadheading. Of course, this happens differently in different areas of the city. We can see that in Toronto Center, the deadheading levels is much lower. This is because we have a denser area and we have a higher possibility of picking up passengers without the driver have to cover longer distances. While in Scarborough, for instance, we have around 45% of total deadheading, meaning that because it's a less dense areas, there's less probability of the driver picking up the next passenger in too close distances. And then we're gonna do this discussion looking at how can we decrease emissions from this sector. Basically, there's different strategies where we can improve our emissions level. First one could be optimizing the system, improving the matching. The second one would be increase sharing activity too. So people, instead of taking individual trips, they would be sharing based on closer origin and destinations. And third one, which is considered to be one of the most effective ways to decrease total emissions, which is electrification. So when it comes to electrification, we are talking about the vehicles from the drivers. So we have to understand how drivers operate in order to see whether or not it makes sense for them to change from a gasoline vehicle to a hybrid or a EV. So looking at the drivers here, we can see that we have around 40,000 active drivers per week around. And usually most of them, they do less than 200 kilometers a week. So 200 kilometers a week is around 25 to 30 kilometers a day. So it's mostly part-time drivers. People don't take Uber and Lyft as a full-time job. And for some drivers, which covers more than 400 kilometers a week, we can technically say they're more likely to operate in full-time basis. For drivers who operate in less than 100 kilometers a week, they usually operate only once or twice a week. For folks driving more than 400 kilometers a week, it usually takes for them 6 to 7 days. But it's interesting that in the day we see cases where drivers drive very low, around 80 to 100 kilometers a week, but they drive every day. So it seems like the drivers, they just turn on that based on their common trip they would be taking anyway, and they just turn it on, they deadheading for the whole segment, and they turn off too. So they just take Uber and Lyft as an opportunity based on the trips they were already doing. And next question we were asking is, what PTC do they work for? So we have a much higher participation in trip numbers from Uber than Lyft. And in most cases, around 60% the drivers operate only for Uber. So what I'm doing here is that I looked at 1 week of data set and I checked whether or not the driver had a trip from Uber, Lyft, or both. And I classified them for every week. So we can see that around 20 to 30% of the drivers, they operate for both platforms, meaning that they are more likely to be full-time because they want to maximize their earnings. So we can see that for drivers who does Uber and Lyft, every week they tend to do around 600 kilometers a week. So it's one strategy to maximize their profit, while the part-time drivers, they tend to do much lower number of trips, so they do either Uber or only Lyft. In this case, I'm not include Uber, which is a Canadian ride-hailing company who started operating last year, and they claim to give 100% of the total fare to the drivers, while Uber and Lyft, they have some take-out rate based on the cost of the trip. Another question we were asking is PTC fleet greener than Ontario average fleet of passenger cars? Quick answer, yes, slightly. We can see that the PTC fleet over time, we are increasing a little bit the participation on EV vehicles, around 44% of the vehicles by the end of 2023. And when we look at the Ontario fleet has a little more gasoline and diesel vehicles, which makes their percentage of EVs a little lower, around 1%. So yeah, we are a little bit better in terms of fuel type participation on EVs. And another question we were asking is, how long does the driver stays in the business? How long does people start working for Uber or Lyft and they continue doing so? So basically we were looking at the difference in time, because they can operate whenever they want. We were looking at the difference in time from the first and the last record we have available. So in this case we're talking about active drivers. So on our data set, if the drivers completed a trip after October, we are considering that they have a possibility of still being available, working in the system as of December 2023. So we can see that the mean time of active drivers in the system has this behavior. We have some drivers who has like a slightly higher participation over 47 months. But we can see that from the total active drivers, around 60% started working in less than 1 year. And then when we look at drivers who left the system, who had no recorded trips after October, we are talking about a much shorter period. So it means that on average, in 1 year, around 75% of drivers left the system. So, which means that Uber and Lyft, drivers they don't see it as a full-term career. They really see this as a bridge for a next job or a part-time job for a next opportunity. And we were discussing the implications of it in terms of being willing to change their vehicle. And then we did the total cost of ownership, which is basically a estimate of all the breakdown costs for different vehicles. We looked at 3 models in particularly, which is electric for Tesla Model Y, hybrid Toyota Prius Prime, gasoline we were looking at Honda Civic, which is the most common vehicles for each, for the ride-hailing drivers in our study. So basically what we did was we looked at all breakdown costs along the time. We were looking at purchase, insurance, operational cost, and maintenance and depreciation too. And then we did a analysis over time, considering that the driver, if the driver commits in the business for, let's say, 1 year or 2 years, what is the final cost of ownership based on their vehicles? And what we found is, first, when we look at 2 years of commitment by drivers, we have different costs based on different vehicles, and conditions. We are looking at new and pre-owned vehicles. We can see that for gasoline pre-owned ownership, so at the end of 2 years, the driver would have to pay from their pocket around 46,000 after selling the vehicle. And when we were looking at new EVs, the total cost of ownership is 23,000. So at the end of this period, if they sell the EV, they would have to pay around 24,000. So it means that EV it has a higher depreciation cost here for the pre-owned vehicles, but at the same time, the price of energy is much cheaper than gasoline. So we have a very lower maintenance cost compared to the other vehicles. For hybrid, we have a higher maintenance cost, and gasoline, even though it's much cheaper over time, it has a very high operational costs to maintenance too. So operational is around 40 to 50% of the total cost. And but one of the advantages of having a new EV is that the upfront cost is very high. So only if we were looking at the purchase cost, it's much higher than the other vehicles. So when we go back and see their total time in the business, which is usually less than a year, it becomes very unlikely for drivers to switch their vehicle in order to operate as a Uber or Lyft driver, because they just don't see this as a full-time career on average. So I guess we're gonna talk more about the supply here with Shuoyan.
So I will introduce the long-term impact, long-term trend of the vehicle for hire trend. And when we talk about the long-term trend, it's important to highlight the COVID-19. COVID-19 changed the way that we socialize and the way we work, and as well as the vehicle for hire service trend. So we have identified several key stages for the COVID-19, and here I want to highlight the March 2030, which is the event of the COVID. And for the first phases, here, when the spread fear of the COVID led people are more concerned of contacting with others, and they want to reduce the use of all kinds of travel modes to reduce the exposure. And let's examine how people's reaction to the vehicle, to the pandemic, to know how these reactions affect the ride-hailing market. So first, let's take a look at the daily demand supply level. So it is obvious that when the onset of COVID, the both demand and supply dropped significantly. This because passengers are afraid of getting infection, and the decreased demand will also impact the supply level, because our ride-hailing market is served as a two-sided market. And we can see that starting from April 2020, it goes through a very slow recovery. And another metric that we selected is the average fare per kilometer for the vehicle for hire service. It can be seen that in general, passengers spend around $2 per kilometer when using vehicle for hire service. And when the pandemic starts, the fare declined slightly. If we look at the long-term trend, it can be seen that the average fare per kilometer goes up a little bit. But if we consider if we normalize this fare by considering the consumer price index, we can see that you actually spend less than $2 per kilometer. And Another interesting metric is the average distance that for the vehicle for hire services. And when COVID started, we can see that the average trip distance increased sharply. This is because passengers like those passengers, if they have the they opt to take work as a transportation option. So they try to avoid taking ride-hailing services for the short journey. And the positive outcome for the pandemic is that the average speed for the vehicle flight service is increased sharply. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question. So in the average trip distances, you can see a sort of like a seasonality where the distances are increasing with certain months of the year, but you don't see that with the average fare in the top right. But from my personal experience, it's a little bit more expensive to take Uber during the winter. And do you think that when you normalize with the CPI, that trend gets lost?
Okay, that's a good question. So we have the trend in trip distance, but like we don't have the similar trend in the average fare, right? And I think because the fare is determined by several factors, the duration, and also the best fare, and also the trip distance. And sometimes Uber will use something called surge pricing to adjust the price. So they are highly related, like the trip distance and trip fare, they are related with each other, but like the overall trend should be similar to each other, but it might be hard to capture the seasonal phase. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And yeah, so for the average speed, like because there are lighter traffic during when we start, so the average speed does increase a little bit. Does increase a lot. And besides the temporal analysis, we also conduct the spatial temporal analysis to assess the spatial equity of the of several characteristics of vehicle supply service. The first metric that we examine is the shared trip percentage. So the shared trip means that you share your trip with other passengers. It is a very important metric because the vehicle hire service seems to make the road more congested, and it will help improve the system efficiency only if you share your ride with other passengers. And however, due to the government enforcement measures, the shared trip has been cancelled for several years. Yeah, starting from the second quarter of 2020, all the shared trip has been cancelled. So no one can use shared trips to finish their ride. And starting from the 2023, the Uber and Lyft recover the shared trip service. However, the average shared trip value is only like 3.6%, which is far below the what it is before pandemic. Like before it was like 20%. And you can see a very slow recovery. It's getting slow recovery in 2023. However, and the shared trip ratio haven't reached the pre-pandemic level. And we have also examined the average speed for the vehicle for hire service, and it's clear that there exists very clear patterns regarding very clear spatial patterns, and the area in the downtown area, like we experience more congestion, and the travel speed is lower. You can see the red area here, and for the other part of city of Toronto, like the average speed is higher. And for the onset of COVID-19, we can see that the average speed is increased for all the areas of the city of Toronto. So all the area experience higher travel speed because of the reduced traffic.
I was just like,
And we have also examined the ride-hailing trip duration to see people's preference to trip with different lengths, and consequently, it can be seen that because of the reduced trip travel speed, and because of the reduced trip speed and the average trip duration is getting longer and longer. And it used to be around 40 minutes, and so now it's around like 80 minutes. This could be contributed by many factors. The first is the shared trip service haven't recovered to the pre-pandemic level, so the vehicle supply service seems to harm the system efficiency. And also the travel speed is decreased. So even for the same trip, the passenger are experience longer duration. And so after talking about the trip characteristic, let's analyze the driver generation process, which means how many drivers do we have for each season. And for the pre-pandemic condition, we have around 9,000 drivers. For the last quarter of 2023, we have around 11,000 drivers. So the number of drivers increased compared with pre-pandemic level. And when the COVID starts, the number of drivers dropped significantly from around 9,000 to around 3,000 because of the reduced demand, and also because of the concern of getting infection. And we do have the supply level here, and one question comes to us is this the best supply level? Do we have some oversupply condition, or do we need more drivers? So we try to solve this problem. So we develop an agent-based model which simulates all the key components of ride-hailing systems. We start from the driver's module to the demand module, and we put in all the matching system, and we use the historical record as a real input to the system. And we hope this could answer the question. And the question is, what is the optimal supply level? What if we scale down those drivers? How does the reduced drivers help improve the system efficiency? So we test two different scenarios. The first scenario is to scale down the drivers by different proportion, ranging from 10% to around 90%. And the second scenario is dynamic pricing, for which we want to use it as a control method to improve the system efficiency. Yeah. So we scale down the driver from 10% to 9%, and we want to know the impact of different supply levels on the ride-hailing metrics. Here are 4 different metrics: passenger waiting time, the driver waiting time, the utilization, and refusal rate has been used. The exchange rate has been used to understand how the different supply level will impact. And here I want to, here the utilization rate means the ratio the driver, the time driver servicing the trip to the time they spend on the platform. So basically, the higher the utilization is, the better the service. So, and for the refusal rate here, we set a threshold of 15 minutes. So which is from a passenger level. If the passenger waits for the system for around 15 minutes, we will let the passenger reject their own request. Yeah. So and it can be seen from the figure that for the 10%, if we only have 10% ride-hailing drivers, and the passenger wait time falls to around 300%, so they will experience longer waiting time. Because if we have less drivers, the platform might have difficulty in matching the passenger and the drivers. So he might match the passenger to the driver who is far away from him, and therefore the driver need to spend more time to picking up the passengers, and which also lead to the lower utilization rate, and also lead to the higher refusal rate. Even for the driver, they will wait for more time to pick up the driver, to pick up the passengers. And you can see that if we increase the ride-hailing drivers here, the passenger wait time experience a decrease. So, and for the utilization rate, we have concave curve here, where if we keep 70% of ride-hailing drivers, we could have best utilization rate. So this experiment tells us that for now we are in an oversupply condition, and we could reduce, if we consider the utilization of the ride-hailing system, we could cut 30% of drivers. However, those measures are hard to take because you cannot prevent driver from logging to the system, and it's hard to set something like license capping. Although City of Toronto is imposing the license capping rules, and we have other control. We have also tested other control methods, dynamic pricing. So the dynamic pricing is we adjust the we adjust the price to change the driver's behavior, to make them stay longer on the platform or make them exit the platform. Here the fare is we don't have the exact calculation of fare, but we do a linear regression to get the fare for each trip, and it can be each trip your cost is consisted of the base fare, which is around $9, and the per kilometer fare rate, which is around 1 kilometer, times the distance that you want to travel. And here the first scenario, we adjust the price lever to the cost per kilometer fare rate. We set it to reduce the 50% of them and increase here, and increase it a little bit. And it can be seen that when we reduce the fare, the passenger seems to wait late, and the driver need to wait more time because there are more and more drivers on the platform. They want to earn money, and the utilization rate is also lower because of the oversupply condition. And it can be seen when we adjust the pricing levels. And also, if we decrease the fare, this will lead to the increased utilization rate. And by changing the fare, the entire riding system could have better utilization. And the dynamic pricing motivates us to examine the driver's behavior given different driver's behavior, especially we are interested in when do they leave the platform. So we adopt time-dependent cost allocation model to understand their risk of leaving the platform. And the shift of driver can be described as this: the logging to the platform at 15:08, and I know for a while then here receive a trip request here, and servicing the trip, and I go again, and I receive a trip request again. And I go for a while, and it found that it couldn't get trip request from the platform, so we just log off. And we are interested in the driver's hazard of leaving the platform given the money they earned and given the service order that they have served. So, and we developed a time-dependent hazard model. The hazard model tells us, compared with those drivers who haven't completed a trip, if a driver completes one trip, it will reduce the driver's likelihood of ending their shift by 16%. And additionally, each unit increase in the fare will raise the likelihood of driver ending their own work by 1%. So this model tells us dynamic pricing can be a useful tool to help improve the efficiency and also to reduce the traffic congestion of Europe, because it does help to change the driver's behavior. Yeah, I think
The two parts before are mostly the driver side data that based on the PTC data. However, in the demand side, we will cover more about the passenger travel behavior, which is based on the 2 years TTS data. So if we look at the PTC mode share trip, we found that although the PTC mode is still marginal in the overall transportation system, however, it doubles when we compare to the pre-pandemic 2016. And if we look at how the PTC trips serve in the whole transportation system, and we found that the dotted line is all trips temporal distribution, and the bars are the PTC trip distribution. We found that the PTC actually they are acting as a complement to other modes, especially in the evening and overnight period in the early morning. And even though the peak is still as usual, it is our AM and PM peak. And we also take a look at the PTC trips by different purposes, and we found that around half of the PTC trips are actually people use it to return home in the afternoon, in the evening, and in the early morning. And however, they are still during morning peaks, people use it to work, and in the afternoon, they actually use it for market and shopping purposes. And because the TTS data reflects people's household and individual profiles. So we could take a look at how those users are. So the conclusion is that the PTC users are actually more younger with the age range 25 to 40, and slightly more female, but it's actually relatively balanced for the users. And most of them are full-time work outside workers and with those professional jobs. And most of them, they have a relatively higher percentage of without a driving license compared to the orange bar, which is the all trip makers. And most of them also have a transit pass, which means that the PTC could actually act as a complementary to the existing transit system. And if we look at the household profiles, those PTC users are actually within higher income households and those households with no vehicles, and most of them are living in apartments rather than houses. And in order to testing some scenarios, we incorporate Shuoyan's driver's generation model into our whole GTA model in order to test different scenarios. So in order to do that, we need to update the current GTA model version to 4.2. And we first split the existing vehicle for hire mode into two separate modes. Because in the current GTA model, the vehicle for hire is a combined mode for both taxi and PTC. In order to start the changes in different modes, we need to split that into two. And because the new TTS data is released just at the end of last year, so the TTS data for 2016 is used for the version 4.2 model. And we also update the model for 2020 situation in order to, because we only have the 2022 road and transit network. And we use the 2022 population and employment for the model, and calibrate the model for 2022 situation for the observed PTC trips. And in order to compare we run one scenario, which is no PTC scenario, and compare that to the business as usual situation. So our first interest is in how the mode would shift for the two scenarios. So this graph, this table shows how the PTC trips in the business side urban base would shift to the other more choices in the absence of PTC. We found that most of the trips would shift to public transit, and then 31% of it was shifting to active mode, which including walking and cycling. This also means that if without PTC, public transit may have a relatively higher ridership. And if we extend the mode shift to the overall module usage, we found that even though in our last group the taxi, the PTC to taxi proportion is small, however, it actually taxi trips would increase by 40% because the original trips for taxi in the base case is relatively small. So even a small increase in trips will lead to a higher proportion of the increase in taxi mode. And also that will lead to a 31% increase in active travel and 5.2% increase for the public transit. And we also compared how those two, the vacation changes for the two scenarios. we found that in the base case, the total vacancy in the city of Toronto area is 16 million. However, in the no PTC scenario, it reduced it by 4%, which means that without PTC mode, the total vacancy would be reduced. And if we break those vacancy into different regions, we will find that the city core region, which has more trips, origin and destination in, will decrease the most for vacancy. So to conclude, in the supply side, we would say the oversupply of the drivers is actually causing lower road utilization, and those actually during the pandemic and actually contribute to reduced speeds of the whole transportation system. And also there are relatively high cancellation rates that have been observed, and it is due to the imbalances between the supply and demand. It's actually due to more cancellations and incomplete trips. And we also observed that the whole system is slowly recovering over the past years. And although there's been a gradual recovery, the drivers' activity and distribution still remain unevenly compared to the pre-pandemic levels. For the demand side, because since the liberalization of PTC service in 2016 in the city of Toronto, the usage has actually tripled pre-pandemic by 2019, and then in our TTS data to 2022, which collectively fall in 2023 spring, it actually recovered to around 60% of the pre-pandemic level, and then reached pre-pandemic level by the end of 2023. And for the trip patterns, most of the PTC trips actually occur during AM and PM peaks. However, in the evening and overnight, they actually as a complement to other transportation modes. And people are primarily use that for return home and followed by work, and the proportion for market trips is increasing. And for the demographics of the PTC user, the young users actually dominate the users, and they're mostly full-time outside workers in professional jobs. And most of them have the highest usage, most have the highest usage among owner households, and the households are often retarded and living in apartments. And in terms of the emissions, the GHG emissions actually increased over the years. And however, the debt hiding part remained relatively stable at around 33 to 77%. And it's actually the full-time drivers that cover the higher mileage than the part-time drivers. And they stay longer in the business and operate for multiple PTCs, which including both Uber, Lyft, or other new service platforms. And for the policy recommendations, I think the main goal to reduce the emission is to reduce the debt hiding part. And in order to achieve this, maybe we need to improve the driver retention and incentive, and those incentives to promote drivers to get more EV adoption.
Alright, since we're already past the hour mark, I would like to ask everyone to hold on to their questions until after the session. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and also the speakers for accepting our invitation to present today. And I would like to ask the audience to give a round of applause to the speakers. Thanks.
Okay guys, thanks for coming. I do prepare a cake so we can share that if you want.